YouTube, and welcome to the video. I'm EmceeFrodis. So, I've spent a lot of time on this channel talking about my love of Star Wars, but I have something I need to confess. I love Star Trek too. This has been a lifelong thing. I started watching Star Trek back in the early 90s with The Next Generation. It wasn't something I got really fanish about. Like, I saw a lot of episodes, but I didn't see all of them. I also didn't really create anything in the Star Trek fandom. With one exception. One big exception that I had to plan, write, post, and travel the con circuit for. Why did it take me so long to be a Trekkie? But still, Star Trek was something I liked to put on if I was doing work where I wanted to watch something without really watching it. But I didn't think much about it after it was over. Then something happened in March. Okay, that was one reason I started to watch, but not the only one. Much better. Anyway, whatever caused the spark of Trek interest, I decided to go through all of the shows and movies. Some of it I'm rewatching with just a more careful eye than I did last time, and some episodes I'm seeing for the very first time. And guys, Star Trek is kind of awesome. Something I love about it is that there is a Star Trek for every mood. It can go philosophical, it can be pure action, total comedy, and deep drama. There's just so much content, it covers it all. I'd like to talk more about Star Trek in the future, getting into characters and storylines, but for now I thought I'd go through the Trek series and rank them in order of my personal favorites, and also suggest some episodes I think you should check out. This is going to be my first of many Star Trek videos, so subscribe to see more of these videos in the future. But at the very least, this will lay down how I personally feel about Star Trek, so you'll know if you want to watch more of my videos. That'll save you some time. So a couple of things up front. One, these are not in order of best to worst. They're just my own personal preference. I actually think the best Trek series isn't my favorite. Two, even what's lowest on the list has one of my favorite things in it. There's no actual Star Trek that I dislike. There's just Star Trek that I like less than the others. 3. There'll be mild spoilers, but I'll try not to go on ones in too deep of detail for the newer installments. And if there is any, I'll give you a spoiler warning. 4. I don't expect anyone to agree with me. My choices are super bizarre. But if you do agree with me, comment below, and I'd really like to get to know you because, seriously, my choices are strange. But 5, if you ask me tomorrow, I'd probably have a different order. I am forever changeable. I actually reordered this list several times while I was writing the script. It's just how I felt at the moment, and it was a flimsy excuse to talk about Star Trek for half an hour. So here we go with MC's ranking of the Star Trek franchise. Number 12, The Next Generation movies. I was actually really surprised this one ranked so low because I love The Next Generation. But The Next Generation movies are not good. It hurts me to say, Star Trek Generations was the first Star Trek movie I saw in theaters. I remember going to the theater with my mom, brothers, and my mom's best friend. We were so excited to see Data on the big screen. But looking at the TNG movies, and it's a big pile of nothing. Aside from Troy and Riker hooking up in one of them and getting married in the next one, nothing happened with these characters. Hell, even changes from other parts of canon meant nothing when it came to these movies. Why is Worf there? Can someone please tell me? He's supposed to be an ambassador to Klingon. Okay, truthfully, I'm not bothered by continuity errors, and that's something I'll get into later on. But what bothers me when it comes to the TNG movies is that nothing ever changes. They're basically just kind of supersized versions of episodes of the television show. These are Starfleet's most elite officers, and nothing ever changes between them in the years between the movies. It's frustrating, and it doesn't feel like anything has an impact. Well, there was that one thing. That being said, TNG has one of my absolute favorite movies. I adore First Contact so much. I think the stuff with Zefram Cochrane is stellar. While the Borg Queen's not my favorite aspect, I really loved seeing Patrick Stewart react to the Borg because it shows that even if someone acts stoic, trauma can resurface at any time, and he acts the hell out of it. But as much as I love First Contact, it's the only one of the TNG movies that I think is really worth watching. Honestly, if this is my low point, why has it taken me 37 years to really fangirl about Star Trek? I mean, this is the lowest on my list, and I still adore it. But it's hard to forgive Bridge on the Captain and all of Nemesis. Number 11, the animated series. The animated series is really weird for me in that I kind of love it in all of its cracky glory. I just feel like it's not strictly necessary. It's like next level Star Trek. It's what you throw down in a super obscure trivia contest. Or if you happen to be writing for the new animated series. Its canonicity is dubious at best, and most of the episodes are just ridiculous. But on the other hand, I love it for being so ridiculous. Like, I was watching it and was like, Kirk is defending Lucifer in a trial? Oh, and now he and Spock are like water creatures. Every episode, you're just kind of like, sure, okay, why not? The quality isn't great. It's 1970s filmation. There's a lot of repeated animation, and all of the non-main characters are voiced by James Doohan and Majel Barrett. It's a fun show, but it falls down on my list because once you get past the novelty of it, there's not a lot there. There are a couple of episodes that I think you should check out, though. And what episodes are those? The standard answer is Yesteryear. It's pretty much universally agreed that Yesteryear is the best the animated series has to offer, and is the only one that is pretty definitively canon. And it is a fabulous episode. But since it's so lauded, I kind of wanted to put attention on two other episodes. First is the Lorelei Signal. Why do I recommend this episode? Uhura runs the ship. The Enterprise dudes get into trouble, so the women are running the whole show, and Uhura's in charge, and it's awesome, and I love it. Uhura's one of my favorite characters. I love her so much. I made my own Funko of her since they didn't have the decency to make their own Nichelle Nichols Uhura. I do actually have the Zoe Saldana one elsewhere in the room. I mean, okay, truthfully, it's not incredibly good. It's actually really jarring that Majel Barrett and Nichelle Nichols voice every single female character in it. But considering up till that point we had never had a female in command, that seeing Uhura get to take center stage was amazing. The other episode I wanted to mention was the Counterclock incident. This episode is notable for being the only appearance of Robert April in canon. He was the captain of the Enterprise before Christopher Pike. It's really nice because it has a message about reliving your glory days and embracing the twilight of your life. Really, when it comes to the animated series, if you don't mind a little, sure, I'll go with it. It's a lot of fun to check out. Number 10, Picard. Ah, old man Jean-Luc. I have some conflicting feelings about this series, which is the reason why it's rated so low. In the future, it might go higher, but for now, it has to settle for me being really ambivalent about it. I like things about Picard. I like the general premise of Picard helping an android based on data. I like Picard being jaded about Starfleet. I like having fallout from the events of Star Trek 09. I like seeing old characters coming back, even if it is just briefly. I even enjoyed the darker tone. Except, and here I have to get into some spoilers, so spoiler alert. They killed my Borg boy crushes. I mean, I would have been okay if they just did it to one of them. Let's face it, Icheb. I don't actually mind the gender-flipped fridging. It is an interesting play on the trope. But they killed Hugh, and I can't forgive that. Oh, Hugh. You deserved better. Other than that, my only real complaint is with the pacing. Maybe it was because I binged the show and it had cliffhangers that I was meant to appreciate. But it took too long to get Soju and Picard together. Then, once we got to the end, the climax just sort of happened in a rush. I wasn't really sure about the balance of things. Picard is a bit harder to pick a single episode to highlight because there's such an interwoven story. But I would have to go with Nepenthe. It's just nice to see Picard with Riker and Troy again. While I do love the new characters on Picard, seeing him with people he's known for decades warmed my heart. And seeing how the relationship had changed from captain and subordinates to friends was just beautiful. Picard may go up on the list in the future, but right now it's still so fresh and we only have the one storyline to go off of. I think it needs to go through some growing pains before I can get truly invested in the show. But I'll never get over them killing Q. 9. Voyager. My relationship with Voyager is a deep and complex one. It's a great series for putting on a single episode and enjoying a random, oftentimes ridiculous adventure. I kind of just want to leave it there. I enjoy Voyager, but as a writer, I become incredibly frustrated by how the characters don't really change at all over the course of the series. It's like my problem with the Next Generation movies, except spread over 7 years of television. But there's still some amazing characters. I love the Doctor, Seven of Nine, Tuvok, who I know most people don't include on the list of amazing characters, but I've got a weird thing for Vulcans. Voyager isn't a bad show. It's just kind of a throwback. We'd already gotten Deep Space Nine, so we'd been kind of spoiled by the idea of characters growing and changing. Voyager was the victim of timing. In the mid-90s, things were starting to move away from episodic to being more serialized. Unfortunately, the premise of Voyager really lends itself to serialization. It's less about being bad as it is a missed opportunity. And if I put on an episode of Voyager, I'm going to end up enjoying myself. Mostly. I mean, that episode is enjoyable, but not for the reasons I intended. For Voyager episodes to check out, one of my personal favorites is Death Wish. If you're a fan of Q, this is the only time he works outside of Next Generation. This episode is really interesting for how it gives us our only good look at the Q continuum. I said a good look at the Q continuum. I love Quinn, mostly because the actor who played him is in one of my favorite movies of all time, which I'll probably be talking about later this month. After 7 seasons of seeing Q on The Next Generation, it's really interesting to see a deconstruction of his species. Voyager has some fantastic stuff in it. I just have some difficulty with the final product. Number 8, Enterprise. It's Enterprise. You know, I can't really say I dislike or super love this one. I mean, I've loved Scott Bakula since the 80s. I like the concept of the first time for everything. The problem is, I have trouble remembering an episode of Enterprise after I've watched it. It's not that I think it's bad. It's fine. But that's kind of the problem. I can watch an episode of Enterprise and think it's okay, but it doesn't evoke a stronger feeling than that. Rather than a deep emotional response, I'm just sort of, huh. So a Klingon crashed on Earth, and that's how first contact with humans happened. Huh. So Rise has been a pleasure planet visited by the Federation since the 22nd century. Why did we never hear about Kirk going there? I bet Kirk and Curzon Dax went there after they signed the Khitomer Accords. Huh. So the Prime Directive was invented to justify genocide. Wait, what? In my introduction, I said that Star Trek was something I used to put on if I wanted to watch something without really watching it. That's kind of how I still feel about Enterprise. There's a large number of characters that I just didn't connect with at all, to the point that once I took a Star Trek quiz where I had to name all of the main characters, and I got everybody in like a minute and a half, and then it took me 15 minutes to come up with Travis's name. And I cheated. Maybe my feelings will change over time. Enterprise is the series I have the least amount of time watching and rewatching, so I could get more into it later on if I see more of it. If I were to pick out an episode that stands out to me, I'd go with Carbon Creek. like I said, I have a weird thing for Vulcans. 3 Vulcans stuck in 1950s Pennsylvania, that's interesting to me. I like seeing the different reactions of the Vulcans being amongst humans, and it adds an interesting layer to the First Contact mythology. I know some people were bothered because it changed when first contact between humans and Vulcans happened. But, I mean, really, the Vulcans landed on Earth like 2 seconds after Zephyr Cochrane's flight. I mean, you're telling me that they were that close to Earth and they never came here? So Enterprise isn't bad. It's just something I frequently forget exists. Later on, my feelings for it might change. Or I might have feelings for it in the first place. Number 7, the original series movies. While I do love everything Star Trek, this is the part of the list where I get into things that I think are more good than bad. So, you know how I complained about nothing having an impact in the Next Generation movies? The original series movies make that all the more galling because that's actually the standout feature of them. The original series was episodic and never had lasting repercussions, but when you look at the movies that people deem good, you see an unfolding story over 4 movies. They all work as one cohesive story in which the characters grow and change in ways they never did in the original series. The things that happened mattered, both for the plot and the characters. The original series begat Wrath of Khan, which goes smoothly into Search for Spock, which segues into Voyage Home and then flows into Undiscovered Country. We do not talk about that one in this house. The movies that are commonly thought of as good have a cohesive storyline to them. We see the crew of the Enterprise go from adventurers gone to seed to statesmen who are changing the Federation through diplomacy. It's a beautiful story of coming to terms with growing older, mortality, and the bonds of friendship. People always say that the odd ones suck, but honestly, there's only one that I will never talk about and will try to forget exists. The others are fine and inoffensive, and the ones that are good are fantastic. While I was writing this, my dad actually asked me which one was my favorite, and I couldn't tell him. Wrath of Khan, Voyage Home, and Undiscovered Country are all wonderful, but in such distinct ways that it's not really fair to judge them against each other. You get something different from each of them. Oh, who am I kidding? It's Voyage Home. I love Double Dumbass on You. Number 6, Discovery. I wonder how many people clicked off when they saw that. As controversial as it is in the fandom, I absolutely adore Discovery. I think it had the monumental task of redefining what it meant to be a Star Trek series. The television landscape has changed so much, and Star Trek had to change with it. While I think it took them a bit to understand what they wanted to do, Discovery's not only fulfilled that requirement, it's far exceeded it. Discovery looks great, it's got complex characters, it's got complex storylines. I am a sucker for House Solkar drama, so I love episodes where Michael is interacting with Sarek, Amanda, or Spock. Hey, I've got a weird thing for Vulcans and the humans that they happen to adopt. Does it fit perfectly with previously established canon? No, but that only matters if you want it to matter. I think Discovery is enjoyable enough that any breaks are just something to roll with, and frankly something that theorists and fanfiction writers can fill in the blanks on. I think Michael Burnham is an amazing character, and this show gives a regular dose of Michelle Yeoh into my life. Right, my big gay crush on Michelle Yeoh reminds me, we finally get some outright queer representation in Star Trek, and we're just going to be getting more of that come season 3, and that's never a bad thing. For fantastic episodes, I think If Memory Serves really stands out. This episode sees Michael and Spock going to Talos 4 to deal with Spock's trauma. Like I said, I love House of Solkar family drama, and this was the first time we really got to see Discovery's version of Spock. Oh, that beard. We also get to see how important that relationship is to Michael. Making it a sequel to The Cage really cements its place as a part of the 23rd century timeline. While I'm sorry to be losing my family drama with Season 3's time jump, I'm looking forward to seeing the far future of Star Trek. Discovery was hampered by having to conform to what came before it, But now they're free of all restrictions, and I think that's going to serve the show really well. Number 5, the original series. When I was growing up, I wasn't a fan of the original series. It wasn't that I disliked it, it just wasn't my thing. However, I always respected it. You don't get anything else on this list without it. In the past, I'd seen an episode or two, mostly the landmark episodes people try to focus on and forget the really silly ones where Kirk switches bodies with his ex-girlfriend. But with going through the whole series, I've gained a new appreciation for the original Star Trek. A very deep, deep appreciation. Yeah, I have to say that when I first started watching the original series, I asked a friend of mine why he never told me Leonard Nimoy was so attractive, and he responded that I had 50 years to figure it out for myself, so it was not his responsibility. Which, yeah, I can totally respect. Like, how did I miss that? And that's not the only reason I love the original series, though. Having sat down and actually watched the entire thing, the original series just makes you feel good. It can be funny, it can be action-packed, and it can be thought-provoking. Yes, a lot of the time it's done through campy acting and dodgy special effects, but that just kind of adds to the charm of it. I think the biggest flaw is that, as someone who's been binge-watching television since before the term binge-watch was coined, the original series gets a little repetitive if you watch too many episodes in a row. But you know what? That's not how the series was made to be watched. When you watch an episode, odds are you're going to feel better after you watch it. As I've been recommending episodes, I've been trying to recommend ones that aren't always at the top of best of lists. With the original series, it's harder because at this point, even a halfway decent episode is legendary to someone. The whole series is legendary. Since I'm not even going to pretend all of these episodes aren't well known, it's Amok Time. I mean, it just is. I love Spock. There's a whole episode where he's so horny he's gonna kill someone. Of course it's Amok Time. It's got the iconic cheesy fight to the death between Kirk and Spock. So much of the Vulcan lore is established. And as someone who is weird about Vulcans, just give it to me. Number 4, The Next Generation. I didn't grow up with the original series. I grew up with this one. The Next Generation has defined how I think of Star Trek. Looking back on it, it's not my favorite, but it's such an indelible part of the lore for me. Picard is what I look for in all of the captains. I'm looking for a scholar, a diplomat, a friend, and a fighter. He showed all of those things over his tenure on the show. I think Data's quest for humanity is the best example of that character archetype, and they've repeated it on basically every other show. Of course, it does have its flaws. Like its predecessor, its bingeability is not quite as high as some of the other shows. Then TNG isn't quite as samey as TOS in that they'll occasionally throw in a Troy or a Crusher or LaForge episode. It's not the same 3 characters as it was in TOS. In some ways, I find TNG to be even more dated than TOS. I think most of that comes from the fact that I lived through the 80s and 90s, so I remember when those looks were an everyday thing. Intellectually, I know the looks of TOS are a product of its time, but I don't have the same emotional response to it as I do something like this. There are so many episodes of The Next Generation that I love, but in my heart of hearts, there is only one episode that could be the top of my list, and that's The Offspring. Data was my favorite character on TNG, and the story of him raising a daughter is just so touching. When he's trying to fix her, and she says she'll feel it for the both of them. Don't look at me. This episode wrecks me in the best way. If I'm watching this episode, I'll ask my friends to contact me 40 minutes later because I'll be bawling. It hurts because I absolutely love these characters. Number 3, Lower Decks. So I know what you're wondering. How can Lower Decks be so high on this list? Higher than TOS and TNG when there have been so few episodes so far. And that's because I like those episodes that much. It's actually the first Star Trek series where I've liked every single episode that's aired. It's such a breath of fresh air. Lower Decks is pure and utter fun. It's silly, it pokes fun at the very thing we love and sometimes hate about Star Trek. Somehow, everything is sacred because nothing is. Galaxy Quest and the Orville are often spoken about as if they were a part of Star Trek because of how lovingly they deconstruct and make fun of the franchise. Lower Decks does this while being a part of continuity. This gives it an advantage because they don't just have to go for those broad generalizations. They can pick apart those general tropes, but they can go for super specific deep cuts, like referencing the giant Spock clone in the Infinite Vulcan, or Crusher hooking up with a ghost in Sub Rosa. Now this one is really up to taste. Comedy is super subjective. My best friend and the co-host on Trashing a Factor isn't a fan of this show because the humor isn't her thing. But for me, it fits my tastes. I think it's irreverent and fun. The characters are adorable. I love the designs. I find every episode of Lower Decks to be an absolute treasure. As I was writing the script for this, a new episode of Lower Decks came out, and it actually changed my episode recommendation. It's really hard to pick an episode for something that's currently airing, but I think any of them are good. I do think Crisis Point, where Mariner reprograms Boimler's holodeck program to become a holo movie of the crew, is the best. It's a glorious love letter to the Star Trek movies that has filled my blackened and shriveled heart with pure joy. From the lens flares, to the reference to Zahn, to Tendi protesting Orion stereotypes, it's utter fun. It's also incredibly touching and insightful. The series is new, but I can't wait for more of it. The love of Star Trek absolutely radiates off the screen. Number 2, Deep Space Nine. This one is actually kind of hard. Deep Space Nine is, in my opinion, the absolute best of Star Trek. The reason it's not in the top spot is stupid and says way more about me than anything about the shows. Honestly, the margin is so razor thin it doesn't really matter. Deep Space Nine is everything I want in Star Trek. It's complex, it's got likable characters that grow and change over the course of years. They all have deep and interpersonal relationships with each other. They have consequences. It's got stupid fun romps and philosophical looks at human nature. Deep Space Nine is the series where the characters felt like real people rather than just archetypes. I was truly made to care about the story that unfolded because it wasn't something that was going to disappear by them warping away to the next planet. Star Trek up to that point seemed so ridiculously idealized that it just seemed impossible. DS9 brought a sense of reality, and I think in some ways it made the utopian ideal of Starfleet and the Federation even more poignant. Instead of being something that humanity evolved past, Paradise was something that had to be worked at, and something that people could fail at. By showing us it wasn't a guarantee, but was something that had to be worked for, it actually felt like something that was in reach in our own real world. There are so many episodes of this series that I could recommend, but an underappreciated gem is In the Cards. Jake wants to get a baseball card for Cisco, which leads to him and Nog going on a series of misadventures around the station doing tasks for the crew. It's really a silly breather episode before the relentless darkness of the Dominion takeover arc, but it really encapsulates so much of this series. It deconstructs the Federation ideal of a moneyless society. It gives a deeper look at the characters of Jake and Nog. It has humorous interactions with characters that don't often get humorous interactions. It's also one of the rare DS9 episodes that you can watch without having to watch 5 more after it. Now, as far as the reason why Deep Space Nine is in the number 2 spot, even though I love it so much, the way I interact with fandom is kind of interesting. I do it through creation. The things I truly love are things that inspire me. I'm content with Deep Space Nine on the screen, so it doesn't really inspire me to create anything new. Not in the way my number 1 pick did. And that is number 1, the Kelvinverse movies. Judge me all you want, but I had to be honest with myself. I watched Star Trek for 20 years and enjoyed it, but it was the Kelvinverse movies that first sparked me to truly think of myself as Trekkie. I wrote a comic series for it. What inspired me to do a rewatch of all things Star Trek actually came from the fact that I decided to randomly read some Kelvinverse fanfic. And I actually write Kelvinverse fanfic now. If you go to my socials, you'll see fan art from the Kelvinverse. It's not perfect. I mean, I'm probably going to end up doing some videos about the flaws I find with these movies. But I love them. I love them for everything they are. From the lens flares to the Kirk being a parody of the original version. It all works for me. Most of it works for me. The casting of these movies are spot on. Most of the casting of these movies are spot on. Benny Batch, I love you. And I actually went to London to see him, but hashtag not my con. I love how the characters are written in this. I feel we got to connect emotionally with Chekhov, Sulu, and Uhura way more in these 3 movies than we ever did in the original series. And I love that Kirk and Spock are different than their prime timeline counterparts, yet you can see exactly how they came to be that character. Kirk's a rebel because of his complex relationship with his father's memory. This version of Spock is much more in tune with his human side because of his relationship with his mother. I also find the alternative timeline to be fascinating, and I'm desperate to know more about it. I want to know what all of the changes are. This is probably why it appeals to me more than anything else. We have a baseline from the Prime Universe, and there's so many places that the changes can go. You can just really go wild. This is something completely different from everything else in the Star Trek universe, and that's not a flaw. It's a feature. It doesn't have to conform to the others because it's not in the same timeline. The best one of these is Star Trek Beyond. Everyone gets a part to play. The story is fun. It connects to Enterprise. We get to see interactions between these characters that give us insights into who they are from another perspective. Of course, there is a lot to love about the first movie, too. Yeah, I love them. I love them in the original series, too. Of course, thinking about those 2 does put some other thoughts into my head. Was also talking about a mock time, too. I do have a weird thing for Vulcans. Oh, I've got some ideas for next time. So, that's my video introducing you to my love of Star Trek. I would really like to talk more about Star Trek in the future, but the best way for me to do that is to have support from my viewers. So please subscribe, share this video, comment, and if you really like things, you can subscribe to my Patreon. I am going to try to get some more interesting stuff up there. So I'm going to be doing a lot more videos coming up. But until next time, may the Force be with you.